Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast. Today, I'm super duper excited to introduce Mr. David Edwards. In 2018, while working with doctors, dentists, counselors, and community health workers, he had an epiphany, or maybe more than one. What was that epiphany? Welcome to the A Little Less Fear podcast, Mr. David Edwards.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent.
I
Thank you so much.
I um I was working as the CEO of a federally qualified or a community health center.
hmm
Are you familiar with community health centers at all?
What state are you in?
I'm in the state of Washington.
Okay, I'm in California, and is this somewhat like a Kaiser type of
Well, it's kind of like actually it's a movement of a sort. It was started back in the 1960s.
Excellent.
And it was, the war on poverty, 1965, all of that kind of work.
Everything that
Um,
happened right before the Reaganomics happened, right? That was right before all this.
It was before all that, yep, in the
Yes.
60s, right? So
Yes.
Reagan was the 80s. And so we're going back to the 60s, and I think it was Lyndon Johnson, in his war on poverty, said, we're going to move the bar on poverty and we're going to decrease inequity in the country. I mean, that was his goal. And so they did, as there was a whole bunch of things they did as a result of that. There's only two things left from all of this big legislation. The one is, now I'm going to get this wrong. I think WIC was a part of that. So women, infants, children, food
Okay.
for pregnant moms and babies and who are in poverty. Um, and the other thing was a community health center, and they started off with two. There was one in the deep South, I think Georgia, but don't quote me on that, and one in like urban Boston.
Yeah, this is new to me. I'm sorry. I was born right at the cusp of 79, 80. I'm 42 years old, so you're definitely educating me a brand new world right here. So just keep
There you
keep on
go.
going. Thank you.
Yeah. And so the idea was we need to get services to the people where they're at. And one of those services was healthcare. And Dr. I think Jack Geiger, if I remember correctly, I mean, I wasn't involved in it then, I was a baby, but um, anyways, they started these two community health centers and they've grown, so we'll go forward 60 years. And today there are 1,400 health centers across the United States.
Wow.
They are private, nonprofit organizations, and they are commissioned, if you will, by HRSA, so Health Resources and Services Administration, so part of the federal government, to provide services to more vulnerable populations. Literally every county in the United States is served by a community health center of one kind or another. And they all have their own different names, because they're all started by a community of people who get together and say, we want to bring services into our area. We need some of this. And so they create a little board and a nonprofit, and they apply, and try to become a health center. And so I was working in 2018 at a community health center. So this is all about integrated whole person care. So our mental model, our clinical model, and our business model were all aligned around saying, I don't know how to say your name.
Just Lino, like it's pronounced Lino, as in if it was spelled Leno, but the I sounds like an E. Yes, Lino.
Okay, Lino. So Lino, you're a patient at our health center. And if I was a provider, or we could do this in reverse, that will be fun.
Sure.
So you're the
Okay.
provider, because you are, in fact, the provider of services, and I'm a patient. So
Okay.
I walk into the health center to come and see you, and we would have a conversation.
Okay.
And you would, with me, determine what my needs are. And I would, talk to you about what I'm concerned about or what I'm thinking. And you would say, this is great, Dave. I think this would be a good direction to go. We would talk about that. And then you would say, Dave, to make us or help us be more successful. Because you see, in our health center, you are the captain of the care team, not me.
Wow.
Right? And so to make this more successful, I think we could use some people that would help us do these things that you've identified that you want some help with, right? So there might be a dentist or a hygienist or a community health worker or a counselor or what we call a BHC, a behavioral health consultant. So let's say I'm diabetic and I'm
Mm-hmm.
concerned about my diabetes. I can't manage my A1Cs and I'm a little depressed about it. And whatever else is going on in life, I got fired and, I'm having a hard time, paying my rent. And so at a community health center, and I think this is more and more common, you would have a team of folks and we flex the team around the needs of the individual patient. But you are the captain, right? Because what happens is if I'm visiting with you for a few minutes, say 40 minutes or whatever my appointment is, the rest of the week I'm on my own, right? And
Yeah, right, exactly.
if I can't manage myself, if I can't
Who
engage,
does?
right, who does? Exactly. And we can't be there, you can't be there, and no matter how many team members there are to support me 24/7, right? I have to have this ability to manage myself, to be my own captain of my own health.
And that's
And
heavy.
so
That's not easy to do.
it's not easy to do, especially when you have financial challenges or other challenges in your life.
Yeah.
And so this was the model that we had built. And we had outgrown our health center. We had this wonderful opportunity to build a brand new health center. And it was going to be twice the size. And we had really felt like we'd refined this model. We had excellent clinical outcomes, whether it was behavioral, dental, physical health. We had great, well, I don't want to go on too much about it, but anyways, so for me personally, I think this model is the future of healthcare, or at least I would like it to be, because it's all about the mission and it's all about the patient and empowering the patient and supporting the patient. And we had the first health center I've ever heard of. We had eliminated any disparities in health outcomes between our majority population and our largest minority population. There was no difference. If I'm a diabetic as a white person and we had a Hispanic farm worker as a diabetic, we have no difference in clinical outcomes. We both
Hmm.
have the same success, same amount
Okay.
of success. And so I was very proud of what our team had created, but we knew with the new building, designing it around this model, because the old model was built around the traditional model, which is if I'm the doctor and you're the patient, I say, this is what you need to do. And I pat you on your head and send you away. And you're a good patient if you do what I tell you to do,
Hmm.
right? That's the kind of
Yeah, but that's is
traditional
not the
model,
way. That's not realistic. Yeah,
but it's not realistic. And it doesn't serve the patient well.
that is so true.
And so we want to turn that model on its head, and you've got to find providers who really believe that. And create a team that really believes that, so that we could then engage with each other, with the patient as partners, to creating the best outcomes that we possibly could. So we had this new building. We were doing all kinds of cool stuff with design, and we had a really powerful model, we felt. And the first epiphany, my first wow, was, wow, I've got great providers and people want to come work here, which is really nice. And patients want to come here, which is really nice. And we've got pretty good technology, and we can help people with transportation. So we were like checking the boxes, all these different things. And then I realized, unless we do something different to help the patient to fulfill this role that we've placed them in, that they need to be in, and they should, and really only they can be in,
Hmm.
unless we can improve their ability to fill that role, we are going to grossly limit our effectiveness, right?
So true. Right.
Because you can do
Absolutely.
all kinds of stuff around the periphery, which is what
Right.
we all are, sorry, but we're all around the periphery.
Periphery. Yeah.
And unless we can help. And so that was the first wow. And so I started thinking about, well, what does that even mean? Right? Vague
Right.
terms. I could be a politician and I could say, hey, we're going to increase your effectiveness and help you be the captain of your life. And then that's my sound bite,
Yeah,
but
but
it
you have
doesn't
if you're
mean
gonna
anything.
talk the talk, you have to walk the walk as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So
so
how did you come up? What did you do? What were your steps?
So then I started studying and I thought, well, what this is about change, right? And there's two kinds of change primarily. If we think of external change, so I got to keep up with technology, right? How to use Zoom or how to use Google, right? or
Right.
WebEx or whatever the tool is, right?
Yes,
And so there's technology, and that's the stuff around us. It's using electric cars instead of old gas cars. It's using headphones instead of, microphones, or it's whatever it is. There's
sure.
all of this constant change in society, and keeping up with that is really healthy. But I'm going to suggest much more important is the change that happens inside of us, right? This is the change about who we are becoming.
Exactly.
This is where we want to lead our lives and not be a passive participant in our lives, but to, in fact, be
Yes,
the captain. Does that make sense?
absolutely.
And so,
So, yes, go
so I
ahead.
started thinking, well, that's all about change then, right? So it's really, this is change. So I started studying like the trans theoretical model of change, which is very common in psychology.
Hmm.
But I had like 6 or 10 change models because we're talking about human beings, and so there's not like one size
Not
fits
cookie
all.
cutter. Yeah.
And so as I studied the different change models, um, and then I was fired. That's a sidelight, but I had a disagreement with my wonderful board, and who I still adore, but um, I wasn't working anymore, so I had more time on my hands.
Hmm.
And so, rather than make money, I thought I'm going to really dive into this because I think this could be really important. And so, studying the Chinto models, and I would love if you would have the same sense of this, I guess. But as I went through them, and I kind of, listed them out and created some kind of bullets and saying, what are the components of all these models? Every one of them had at its foundation, the first or the second level of its foundation was talking about personal motivation. And that was the common theme. And they varied
Personal
from there,
personal motivation or their lack of.
or lack thereof. Right. So it's
Okay, okay.
intrinsic motivation. And so
Yes.
I thought, if that's the common theme, and I don't really want to, because I'm working mostly through most of my career, whether working in Alaska with a Native American population or in Nigeria with an African population, Native population, or with lower income individuals or farm workers or whatever it happens to be. I'm working with people who I think need to build more than anything, and frankly, all of us do, strong foundations. And so I didn't want to do the master course. I thought, what are the foundations that we can build on? Because everything I found out there was all about how to build the stuff that's above, that's high. Like using a natural metaphor,
Hmm.
I wanted to focus on roots and trunk. So, like a cherry tree, because I was working in a place growing a lot of agriculture, a lot of cherries. And so I thought, what you need is a strong roots and trunk. That's the core of who I am. And it's the foundation of my motivation, right? That motivation then gives me drive, if you will. And I don't like that because that's kind of a mechanical term, but
Right.
it's what gets me up in the morning.
It's what's gonna bear fruit in your tree, in your branches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so most of the stuff that you get out, you go out to YouTube or on the internet, it's like, how do I do this? How do I, succeed at this? How do I grow my podcast? How do I start a business? How do I communicate with people? How do I, et cetera, right? It's all about how, and it's the stuff. Is this both? Is it always audio and video, or we do like some of it's
Yes,
only
it's both.
audio?
It's both.
Okay, so if you can see my hands, it's all of this stuff about how do I grow more fruit? How do I
Yes.
have a bigger top of the tree?
Right.
And very little of it is focused on how do I create a trunk and a root system that are strong enough
That's so
that
true, David. It seems
produce
like,
this naturally.
yeah, wow, that makes sense. I mean, I love your analogy and I can see it because a lot of people just they don't see they see the end result. They're like, okay, I need to get that. But they don't have the tools yet to be able to even know that they already have the foundation. It just needs to be watered in order for it to bear fruit.
Exactly, exactly. And
So how do we water it?
so then how we water it is we nurture, using this kind of the organic and more natural metaphor, we nurture our motivation. Because the biggest advantage of this, so there's two big advantages. The first is that by strengthening the roots in the tree, so these foundations, we produce as much as we can naturally and normally. It's a lot less work, it's a lot less stress, it's a lot less effort, because what we have built, the person we have become, will produce this kind of output naturally. And just
Yes.
like in nature, when like this year in our area, in the Northwest, we had 3 inches of snow on Sunday,
Wow.
which is unusual for the middle of
Incredible.
April.
Wow.
But that happens, right? It's a late spring.
Yes.
And so,
That's
and
true.
it's
It's a
been
late
like
spring, but things will still blossom.
they will still blossom, right?
True.
But with a late spring, you're going to probably produce less because there's
Very
less
true.
growing season.
Less time.
But by having a strong roots and trunk, I'm going to produce as much as I can given my
Time frame.
circumstances,
Wow. Yes.
right? And that's how we work as well. And that's how we work as human beings. What happens though is we have like a late spring, and if we have a weak roots and trunk, like, we focused on growing as many cherries as we can, and we got this as heavy as we can get it. But when we've got a weak trunk and weak roots, what happens is our failures tend to be more catastrophic. So we have a late spring, or we have not enough rain, or maybe there's an insect
Infestation.
infestation,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, right? And in our lives, it's things like I'm having relationship troubles, or I'm struggling with my self-esteem, or somebody is kind of attacking my business, and I'm having a hard time with that, or we have a breakdown, or we get fired, or the car
Right.
breaks down. Whatever it is, there's all these stressors in life, and with the weak trunk and roots, we can't handle those stressors, and our failures tend to be more catastrophic.
Wow. That
Versus
makes
with a
sense.
strong roots and trunk, right? We'll have those same kinds of things happen, but we're strong to endure them. And we use words like, I love the verb of resilience. So we resile through
Right.
temporary setbacks, we persevere through longer term challenges, things that we might have to deal with for a long time or maybe our entire lives. And so I think the beauty of the natural metaphor is that you're not a machine. And just because you're different, you're not broken. You're just
So
a little bit
true.
different of a natural thing. And
Yeah.
these principles apply to us no matter who you are, what your background is, what your history is, your income, your race, your education level, right? It doesn't matter, because those are all
Right.
superficial external things, right? So we're talking about this inside, this who I really am at my core,
Yeah.
and building it up. So there's
So
10
who you are
principles.
as your core, I'm sorry, David, I just want to make sure that I'm
Yeah,
understanding this correctly. Who you are at your core, that's going to be your roots and your trunk, correct?
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha. So let's yes, let's go.
and so and so the first of the principles, right? The first foundation, I liken it to like the seed. The first thing it does is it germinates. So it's in the soil, it's got enough moisture, and it germinates, and it starts to seek nutrients, and it starts to put out its roots. And that's really like our values. And this isn't a vague sense of, yeah, I like nature is important, or family is important, or your health is
Yeah.
important, right? This is a profound and explicit understanding of what and I like five. I don't know why, but I like five because I can remember five things. And so I suggest to people, in the first chapter of my book is really this process. I walk you through about why values are important, how it creates this, first part of your foundation. I walk you through a process where you identify your top 5 core personal values. This isn't your parents' values, your roommates' values, your best friend's values, your spouse's values, whatever else. This is you as yourself.
David, what's an example of a value? You mean like integrity? Always have integrity? Is that a value?
Integrity is a value, yeah. And so, like for me, transparency is one of my 5 core values. And so what I did with that, so let's say I go through this process, it doesn't take a long time, maybe an hour, and I figured out what my 5 core values are, transparency being one of them. So then I said, okay, so I want to make that powerful for me though, because a vague sense of transparency is vaguely helpful. And we
Sure.
want to be specifically and powerfully helpful, right? And so then I want to take that value and say, well, what does that mean to me? Right? So what's my history with it? And so I decided that I have seen enough in my life where when David is talking to Lino, I said one thing. When I'm talking to Lino's roommate, I said a different thing.
Different thing.
Because I have a different agenda. I have this hidden agenda that's not transparent, right? Well, I don't have any
Sure.
room for that in my life because I don't like it when people treat me like that.
Right.
And I'm also not smart enough because if there's more than 2 people in the room, I can't remember which story I told to which person. So I just tell everybody the same story and I
Sure.
try to live my life transparently. And so I defined what that means. Like, what does transparent mean? It means I don't
Yes.
have hidden agendas. I'm not fooling or manipulating or that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And I describe why that matters, why that's important. And then I describe why is my life better for living that value. And what this does, the process of writing these things down, it's really important that you write it down because that's a psycho neuromuscular kind of a process, is that starts to embed in your mind, oh yeah, these are my values. That's what it means. So this is what it looks like. This is why my life is better off doing that. And you go through this whole process. It sounds like a lot, but it takes about 2 hours and it doesn't cost anything to do it. I mean,
Right.
and that's beautiful, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
And
then
what the
once you do that, you
psychology
can actually put it
research,
to action.
you put exactly, then you've got to put it into action. And I recommend that you have your values. In chapter 2 of the book is about awareness and feedback. And so I recommend a process of I am intentional, which is the 4th principle, in the morning, and I'm accountable in the evening. So in the morning, I say to myself, my intent is, for example, I'm struggling to live my value of transparency, right? Maybe I've
Hmm.
got some things going on and I'm struggling with it for whatever reason. So I review in the morning and say, today I'm really going to work on my transparency. And I review why that matters, what it means to me, and what it looks like to live it. And then at the end of the day, I take a few minutes and I go, well, how did I do? Right? And I can say, well, I did really good here, but then I think I was dancing on the borderline right here,
Uh-huh.
and I could do better. And
Yes.
then, I recommend a process for reviewing and rewiring what I would do in that instance, right? So that we start to rewire our brains. And what we're doing, and you know this better than most people, and I have a thumbnails of understanding. But what happens when we do these things is it develops pathways in our prefrontal cortex. This is our thinking executive centers of our
Yes.
brain. And what happens is by going through the process, we're building up pathways. And in times, what happens, over time, what happens is we continue to develop these pathways. They become normal and natural thought process for us. And then you don't really have to try anymore because, in the spirit of the title, you are becoming a new you. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a I did it and I'm done thing. It's not like, growing one more cherry. It's a process of through the rest of your life, you becoming the best version of you that you can. You are a new you, but it's a constant, ongoing, beautiful, wonderful, amazing journey of life. Anyways, so those are our first. And I think this is how we become the captain, right? Because we make our values explicit. They create guidelines for us. Some people call them barriers, right?
Yeah, like
And
blocks.
right, but I think the key here is that it's not like a barrier that somebody else is imposing on us. What we're saying is like when I'm driving down the freeway You're driving 70 miles an hour. If you're in California, 85. and 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 as I know in my rental car, I was going 70 and the Corvette passed me going at least 85.
Yeah,
But anyways, you're going down the freeway, right? We put barriers down the middle between the lanes,
exactly.
right?
Yes.
But why in the world would we do that? Because barriers block us from doing the things that we want to do, right? What if I want to drive in that left-hand lane going the opposite direction?
Right.
Well, we've decided that we're better off by creating a barrier there because we know that in the long run, that's going to harm us, right? So we
Absolutely.
put a barrier, a boundary around which we guide our efforts, right? It provides a framework that we can be more effective, we can be more confident,
Mm.
we can have less fear, and we can
Yeah.
actually go faster,
Right.
right? We can get more done because we've created these boundaries within which to live our lives. But it's our own choices, it's our own values that really creates those guideposts.
David, you mentioned a word earlier that's sticking in my head, and I have to ask you, how does one gain awareness of their values? Like I can see once you actually get on the highway and you have your values on your back and you're ready to go. But what about, because I've met these people and that's why I'm asking you this. And how do you, I'm not aware of my values. What do you say to that?
So I recommend that you go through the first chapter of the book and make your values explicit. And I don't know, there are no doubt other ways to do it. I'm not aware of them. I
Sure.
think this process of the things that I looked at, this is the simplest way to go about it. And you just have to put some mental effort, right? If we think about our values, but we put no effort into it, we're going to be just the same as we were before. So we have to
Exactly.
put a little bit of intentional effort into saying, I think what Dave is saying, and it's not me, it's Dr. Albert Bandura and Dr. Kristen Neff and I mean, I have a whole list of resources on values, right? All of these bright people that have researched and said, if I can do this, I'm going to have more meaning in my life. I'm going to be tend towards greater well-being. I'm going to have more focus. I am going to have less regret, and I'm going to get more done because I'm building this foundation of my own internal or intrinsic personal motivation, right? We're planting those seeds and developing that motivation. It's a very natural process. And if you don't get it all done in 2 hours, so the heck what, right? If
Right.
it takes you 1 hour or 3 hours or 5 or whatever, it doesn't make any difference. What is the key is that you're taking some effort and you're putting that into making your life better and creating these foundations and making it explicit.
That's incredible. You're definitely motivating me to write down my values tonight. And you know what? I'm going to do that and hold myself accountable at the end of the day and see where I'm at as once I write it all down. Thanks for being on a Little Less Fear podcast. You've been amazing. How can our viewers, our watchers, and our listeners find you? And where can we find your book?
So my book is called Knew You, Who Knew?
Love it.
And yeah, and well, because it's surprising, right? And my last
Right.
chapter is on mindlessness. If that doesn't pique your curiosity.
It does. Yeah.
So
Mindlessness, huh?
there you go. And so my website is the easiest way to find me, davidredwards.com.
Okay. DavidR. Edwards.com.
www.davidredwards.com. And you can find my book there. It's only on Amazon right now, so there's an ebook version and a paperback version. I didn't do a hardbound because I wanted to make sure it was affordable as possible for people.
Yes.
Um, and that's probably the best way to go. And you can go to Amazon if you look up Knew You, Who Knew? I think it should come up.
I'm sure.
And let me see if I've got it. Can I share something really quick with you?
Sure.
I got a review from a woman in England.
That's so awesome.
She says, after a really tough few years with the pandemic, work and personal ups and downs, this book was just what I needed to read. It's given me an impetus to take stock and reevaluate, lifting me up from from some of the routines and ruts I'd fallen into that were not best for my mental health and well-being. It is beautifully easy to access. And I'm going to move my screen back over here, but the book is written for everyday average people, not MBAs, business titans, psychologists, sorry.
It's okay. No, not a problem. I agree. There needs to be more everyday type books. That's
I
why
mean,
that's why the everyday people, I mean, that's why that's such a pandemic, actually. People not finding their authenticity is because there are things that are not for everyday people. And that's where you come along. People like you and other people that I'm meeting that are motivating me are doing things for the everyday population, for the everyday person, and that's going to keep us motivating and that's going to keep the trees growing.
perfect.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David. Do you have anything else to add?
Lino, that's it. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much.